Hey everyone, today I'm sharing my eyeshadow palette collection. I always like to film an updated version of this video at the beginning of every year. Make sure to stay tuned because I do need to film an eyeshadow palette declutter. I just need to work up the courage to do that, but that will be up within the next few weeks. But in the meantime, I thought I would go through them one by one. Okay, let's start with the Urban Decay Naked palettes. I do have the Urban Decay Naked Reloaded. I think last year I actually decluttered the original 3 Naked palettes. I did enjoy them, but I've just found a lot of other neutral palettes that I like more. Out of all of the Urban Decay Naked palettes that I own, this one is probably my least favorite, so I will probably end up decluttering it when I do film my declutter video. But I do really enjoy these next 3 palettes. So I have Urban Decay's Naked Cherry. I think the colors are so gorgeous. What I like about these palettes in particular is that they're not neutral palettes, but they're also not super colorful. So it's an easy way to incorporate color into your makeup look. And the shades in these palettes are just very well coordinated. Urban Decay's Naked Heat is one of my favorites because no matter what type of look I do, I feel like all of the colors go together really well. Because of that, sometimes the looks can look very similar no matter what shades I reach for, but I do really enjoy the formula. I think the colors are beautiful. Urban Decay's Naked Honey is one of the newer palettes in my collection. I really enjoy this one. I think it's like an updated take on their original Naked palettes, even more so than Naked Reloaded. I think the tones are so beautiful and they would be really flattering on a lot of different skin tones. It's a little bit on the lighter side, but I do enjoy using this one as well. I've had Urban Decay's Naked Smoky in my collection for a while, and this one just kind of goes unused. I always think I'm going to use it more than I actually do. I'm kind of more into cool tones than I really have been in the past, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time. The Too Faced Sweet Peach palette is one of my favorite palettes ever. I think the colors are just so wearable and easy to work with, and I still find myself reaching for this palette all the time. I also love the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette. I've had this one for a while. A couple of these palettes are getting a little bit older, but I loved the chocolate bar line even more than the Naked palettes. I had the original one and Semi-Sweet. I ended up decluttering those because they were getting pretty old. This one is too, but I love that it's a little bit more cool toned. It's always been one of my favorites. The Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette is such a gorgeous palette. I think the formula is so beautiful. The metallics are easy to work with. They're blendable and smooth, and I just think it is really gorgeous. It's one of my favorites as well. I have the Too Faced Gingerbread Spice palette, which comes with a lot of really beautiful colors. There are some brighter tones, some neutrals. Again, the metallic shadows in this palette are really great as well. Moving on to some Anastasia palettes, I do have the Modern Renaissance palette, which I think was one of my first Anastasia palettes. I still really love some of the shades in here. I find that I get a lot of use out of the lighter shades in particular, and that one shade that I hit pan on is like one of my favorite eyeshadows of all time. I also have the Soft Glam palette, which I tend to reach for more so during the summertime. I think that there are a lot of gorgeous shades in here, and you can do like an easy day to night look. So if you want to do something a little bit more dark and smoky, you can add a couple of shadows, but overall I think it's just a really fun palette to have as well. I think one of my top Anastasia palettes is the Norvina palette. I feel like this one has like some mixed reviews. People love it, they hate it, but I just think it's so stunning. I love that the colors in here are a little bit more subtle. There are some great neutrals to pair with like the purples and pinks, and I love the look that I get with it every single time I use it. I also really love my Sultry palette. This is one of my favorite palettes of all time, and I'm sure you will hear me say that a lot of these are my favorites, but that's why they're in my collection. I just really enjoy them. I think that this palette is so perfect if you do a lot of neutral looks, and it's just something a little bit different. It's like more intense than your typical neutral palette. The shimmer shades are so gorgeous and stunning. I do have the Anastasia Riviera palette. I purchased this one back in like March or April of last year. I haven't gotten as much use out of it as I have like other Anastasia palettes, but I do think the quality is really good. As you guys might know, the Anastasia Jackie Aina palette is one of my absolute favorite palettes. I did rank all of my palettes that I tried in 2019, so I'll link that video in the description box below if you guys are interested. But this one was my favorite of the year. I think it is so perfect. The quality is just a step up from their regular palettes, but the colors are just amazing. They're intense and gorgeous, and I enjoy using it so much. I think the palette that I ranked lowest in that video was the Anastasia Carli Bybel palette. I wanted to like this one, but it just didn't work out well for me. I feel like the quality is very inconsistent, and that's mainly why I ranked it very low. You can get some really pretty subtle eye looks using this palette, so it's not a complete fail, but overall it just didn't live up to like Anastasia quality in my mind. I do have the Tati Beauty Textured Neutrals Volume 1 palette. I'm excited to see what Tati releases in 2020. I'm hoping for like a cooler toned blue purple palette from her. I think that would be so pretty, but the quality is really good. The matte shadows are really intense, and overall I really enjoy this palette. I do have a full review, so I'll link any related videos in the description box below. I also reviewed the Kathleen Lights ColourPop So Jaded palette, which is one of my favorites as well. It's a little bit of a larger palette, but I think the colors in here are very interesting. I just think you can do a lot of different looks just using this one palette, which I think is what, you kind of look for in a larger palette. I also have the Bare Necessities palette, and I filmed this video before I went out of town, but I took it with me. We were out of town for like almost 2 weeks for Christmas, and I used it every single day, and I've really been enjoying this one. If neutrals are your thing, then you'll definitely have everything that you need in one palette with this one. So I'm sure I'll talk about it more in an upcoming video, but I have a couple of ColourPop palettes that have single shadows in them. So this one just has like a bunch of colorful shadows. To be completely honest with you guys, I haven't even used this one yet. I do love colorful shadows, but my eyeshadow palette collection is a little bit larger than I would like it to be, so I do need to go through and declutter so I can really focus on using ones that I do love. But I recently purchased like a couple of empty palettes and reorganized my single shadows. So a lot of these are a little bit older. I don't know if they're all available on the website right now, but you can definitely go on the ColourPop website and create your own palette with shadows that you want. I'm looking forward to getting more use out of my single shadows in 2020. They've kind of gotten neglected because they've really been in like the back of my drawer for such a long time. So once I kind of reorganized them, I got a little bit more inspired to use them. So I'm excited to really focus on them in 2020, like I said. So moving on to ColourPop palettes, I do have quite a few. They make up a big majority of my eyeshadow palette collection. The first one that I have is the Perception palette. This one was a collab with Makeup Shayla, and I think that it's a really pretty palette. It has some nice colorful shades. Not too many neutrals, but a couple of neutrals, but overall it's a little bit more of an intense palette, and I think it performs really well. I also have the Through My Eyes palette, which was a collab as well, and this one is a really unique, colorful palette. Like there are some pretty greens, some neutrals, some purpley tones, some pinks. I really enjoy using this one as well. The Fame palette is one of my favorites because they didn't do a lot of cooler tones, and I feel like they do still focus more so on warm tones, but it just looks like a basic neutral palette, but because it is cooler toned, I've reached for this one so much over the years. I also have the Fortune palette, which I think these were released at the same time or around the same time, but it's kind of like the Fame's sister palette, but a warm toned version. I actually have a video on my channel where I kind of like compare all of my ColourPop palettes. So if you're interested in knowing more about my favorites, which ones I recommend, I'll link that video below as well. I have You Had Me at Hello, which is more of a neutral palette. And I will say that I did declutter a couple of ColourPop palettes last year, and they kind of made their way back into my collection because I had saved them to film that ColourPop video. And then I think I forgot which ones I decluttered. So you will see some that I think I decluttered. I'll just need to declutter them again in 2020. But I also have Element of Surprise. I think this is one that I did declutter. It is a gorgeous palette. I just don't find myself reaching for it as much as I do other ColourPop palettes. And as you guys will see, I do have quite a few ColourPop palettes, so it really is not necessary to keep all of them. But we'll get to that when I film the declutter video. I'm just not quite ready to do it yet. I do have the Rendezvous palette, which I believe was like an Ulta exclusive. It's hard to remember because they released so many palettes at this point, but it has a lot of gorgeous colors in it. I love the pink tones in this palette. Yes Please was like their very first eyeshadow palette release. It's a very warm toned palette. So you get like yellows and golds, oranges and reds. And I don't really reach for this one a whole lot because I don't wear those shades too much these days, but I do remember it being so popular when they first released it. I do enjoy the Dream Street palette, which was a collab with Kathleen Lights. There are a lot of pretty colors in here, so you do get like your typical warm tones, but I think like that silver and those greens add a lot to the palette. And this is a palette that I think is just a little bit better than the rest. Like a few ColourPop palettes are just extra good, and this is one of them. I also have the Kathleen Lights Zodiac palette, and I like the quality of this palette, but again, I don't find myself reaching for this one as much just because there are so many different colors in it, and while they all perform really well, I just find that when I grab this palette, I do have to reach into quite a few other palettes to create a complete look, which is fine. I don't mind doing that, but it's not necessarily one of my go-tos. I have been reaching for the ColourPop Double Entendre palette a lot lately. I just think it's a very easy, simple, neutral palette. The shades are a little bit lighter, but I have a tendency to go very heavy-handed with my eyeshadows, so if I want to keep things really simple, this is one that I do enjoy using. I also love the I Think I Love You palette, and I think they actually discontinued this one, and I think it is so beautiful. I mean, at this point, they have quite a few neutral palettes on the website, so you could probably find something very similar, but this has always been one of my go-tos. I've been reaching for it a lot lately as well, which is why it kind of looks a little bit messy. I do have this one. This one is the Good Sport palette, and I think the colors in here are so pretty and perfect for the fall season if you like to change up your makeup seasonally. Of course, you could wear it any time of the year, but it's a very intense palette. The colors are a little bit more unique and interesting and eye-catching, so that is a fun option. This one is the Whatever palette, which is one of their newer palettes. I actually dropped mine, and all of the shadows were okay, but a few of them kind of popped out, so I don't know if these are in like the right order, which is why mine might look a little bit different, but it is a good like staple warm-toned neutral palette. I do have the Birdie palette, which is a little bit newer to my collection, but I love this one. I really enjoy pinks and purples, so of course this one really appeals to me. It does have 2 pressed glitters, which is something to note in case you are not a fan of the pressed glitter shadows, but I love the color story. You can get a really light look or something a little bit more intense and colorful. Okay, moving on to some of their 9-pan palettes. So I do have the Frozen palettes. This one is the Aina palette, and I think that this one performs really well. The quality is great. The shadows are smooth and blendable. The Elsa palette I did feature in a couple of like disappointing videos because there are shadows in here that really aren't that great. The darker shadows are really, really good, but some of the lighter shadows, the metallics, are really patchy. They're very lackluster, so that is not one of my favorites, but I do like the colors in it. The Soul palette is a great option if you're looking for a smaller, warm-toned palette because it does come with 9 warm shadows. I personally love the Mar palette. This one comes with some neutrals, but I love that it has like pops of blue. I know that was really big like last year, but I do think it's a fun option to bring if you're traveling because you get your staple neutrals, but also a few colorful shades. The Going Coconuts palette has been one of my favorite palettes of 2019. I think the colors they're neutral shadows, but they're so easy because they're not overly warm toned or overly cool toned. They're just great staple neutrals. If you want like a deeper version of Going Coconuts, Brown Sugar is a great option. They've had this one around for a while, and I think it would be a good option if you have a darker skin tone or if you're looking for deeper neutrals. There are some, like this one leans a little bit more warm toned, but again, it performs really, really well. I do have the Baby Got Peach palette, and you guys, I've never used this palette, and I can't believe it. I didn't even realize I had it. It was kind of like stuck in the back of my drawer, and I think they had sent it to me in the mail as PR, and at the time, I was either out of town or I was testing a couple of other palettes, so this one just got completely overlooked, and I'm so excited that I found it because I think it's going to be a staple for me during the spring. The ColourPop Ooh La La palette is like a very pink-toned palette with a few other shades in it. I think it's really pretty. I haven't reached for it a lot lately just because it is so intense, but I do love their monochromatic palettes, which is what we're kind of getting into. So I have the Main Squeeze palette, which is a very red-toned palette. It's really intense and beautiful on the eyes, but it is pretty intense, so just keep that in mind if you're planning on purchasing it. I also have the Orange You Glad palette, and I did not use this one either. This one I knew that I had, but I don't know. I don't wear a lot of orange toned eyeshadows. I think the colors are pretty, and if you love oranges, you might really enjoy it because their 9-pan palettes are really good. I really love Aha Honey. I think the colors are so pretty, and it's not as what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as colorful on the eyes as you would expect it to be. If you use the shade Buzzkill in the bottom right-hand corner, the look is a little bit more neutral, but again, it's like an updated version of a neutral look. You can get a really yellow and like golden look if you want, but I just think it's so pretty, so much fun for the summertime. Just My Luck is their green toned palette. I think I purchased this one back in like March or April, and it comes with 9 different green shadows. Overall, it performs well. There are a couple of shadows that are a little bit patchy, but if you love greens, you will enjoy this one. One of my favorites is the Blue Moon palette. I love blue eyeshadow personally, but I just think this one is so much fun to look at and so much fun to use. It blends really well and the colors are perfect together. But I think my favorite palette that they've done in like the 9-pan palettes would have to be It's My Pleasure. I love every single shade in here, especially the metallic shades. They're so stunning on the eyes. And if you like pinks and purples, you will love this palette. It is so perfect and so much fun to use. Again, I just get so excited when I actually get to pull it out and use it. I have a couple of ColourPop 15 pan palettes. So I have like their original Disney collaboration, which is a pretty neutral palette. This one was like part of their very first princess collection. And I like using it on days where I want something, again, a little bit more simple. I also have their Golden State of Mind palette. This one was part of their Sephora collaboration. I think they only had like one Sephora collaboration, but I love this. The shadows are all metallic and gorgeous on the eyes. I was so sad when they discontinued it, but I was glad that I was able to get it. And then I have the Chasing Rainbows palette. I lost a few shades in here, but this is a really pretty palette as well. There are some gorgeous colorful tones, a few neutrals. This palette's a little bit older. It's All I See Is Magic. It was one of like their first holiday collections, and I don't know, I still love it. I think the colors are a little bit more subdued and jewel toned and perfect if you're doing more of like a cool toned smoky eye. I love the Misunderstood palette. I tried this out for the first time, I think in 2019. I don't know how old it is, but it is so much fun to use. The metallic shadows are intense and beautiful, and I've enjoyed it so much this year for like a really pretty smoky eye with like a hint of color. Two of my favorites are these ones from the Bretman Rock collaboration. I have the Lip palette, which comes with 8 different warm tone shadows, a couple of neutrals, but really intense, vibrant, orangey reds. And then I also have the Wet palette. I think that these are a little bit underrated, but they perform so perfectly. The Wet palette is a gorgeous option, again, if you like blue tones, but the green and the silver are really pretty as well. Okay, I think that wraps it up for ColourPop palettes. So I do have the Persona Cosmetics Identity palette, which is one of my favorites. Again, this is a little bit of an underrated palette. I didn't actually see it on Ulta's website the other day when I was looking, so I don't know if they are discontinuing it or if they just took it off the Ulta website, but I do really love this palette. The formula is really smooth and the colors are a little bit more subdued, but they're perfect for more of like an everyday look. This one is the Face Candy Atlantis palette. I still really love this one. It was released when like greens and blues were kind of becoming a thing, so I did purchase it and I do enjoy it. The metallic shadows are perfect. The matte shadows are a little bit powdery, but overall, I love it. It was really affordable. And then I also have a Milani palette. This one is the Gilded Desires palette. It comes with a couple of warm toned neutrals and it performs well. I think that Milani just released quite a few new eyeshadow palettes, so I'm kind of curious because the ones that I've tried have been really good. I actually really love this palette. This one is the Most Loved Mattes palette, and I was impressed by the quality from like the very first time I used it. I think Milani can be a little bit expensive for the drugstore, but I do think the actual quality of their products is really good. Not all of their products are expensive, but I do think the eyeshadow palettes tend to be a little bit higher priced, which is probably why I don't have more of them. This is a palette that I got in, I believe, a BoxyCharm box, but the shadows are really, really blendable and intense and smooth, so I do enjoy using that one. The Too Faced Life's a Festival palette is a little bit older, but I love this palette. I think the duochromes are so pretty. I love duochrome eyeshadows just because they really transform your look. And I think that this one got like some mixed reviews, but I do think it is a really pretty palette. It just adds like a pop to the eyes whenever I use it. I have a few palettes from Dose of Colors. I just got this Hidden Treasures palette in I think a BoxyCharm, and the layout is a little bit weird, but the shadows perform pretty well. I've only used it a couple of times, but I have been enjoying it. I also have the Dose of Colors Friendcation palette, which is one of my all-time favorite palettes. I just think that it's such a perfect palette. The neutral shadows are so smooth and easy to blend out, but the metallic shadows just add like the most gorgeous pop to the eyes. Whenever I wear this, like a lot of you guys are like, you're wearing Friendcation because it's just such a unique palette. The formula is really perfect. I have a couple of these 5-pan palettes. So Marvelous Mauves is one that's been in my collection for a while. I love the colors in here because I do love like cooler toned pink shades. This formula is a little bit powdery, but it's also very blendable. So it tends to look very smooth on the eyes, very well blended, but it does create like a lot of fallout. A lot of the shadow like kicks up when you dip your brush in. I got Sassy Siennas in a subscription box. I think that I've only used it like once or twice, but I think it could be a really fun option to bring with me if I travel during the summer, just because it is small and compact, but the shadows are really warm and fun, and I love like the coral tones as well. I also got Pretty Cool in a BoxyCharm as well. And this one, I mean, it looks slightly underwhelming, but I do love cooler toned eyeshadows, and I feel like I'm missing a lot of those mid-toned, cooler toned shades. So I do think that this is a fun option when I'm looking for like a good transition color. I just think it is a nice palette to have. And again, they're very blendable, so they're pretty easy to work with. I got this Violet Voss Holy Grail palette in a subscription box as well, and the shadows are nice. I think it's the only Violet Voss palette that I own, but I was pretty impressed by the quality. This one is the Urban Decay Beached palette. It's a little bit older, but I think that it is a nice, smaller, compact palette. I don't think you can still get it, but again, this was released when like pops of blue inside warm toned palettes were really popular. So it was fun to use like when I was traveling because again, it's very small, compact, easy to work with. I recently tried out these palettes from the brand Kaleidos. They did send these to me in the mail as PR. I tested out the green one and then a couple of shades from one of the other ones, but I was so impressed by them. The matte shadows feel like pressed pigments because they are so rich and intense, and a little bit goes an extremely long way. But they're also really blendable, which I feel like is different because a lot of pressed pigments that I've tried have not been easy to blend out onto the eyes. But these palettes are really, really easy to work with. I love the color stories. I like that they are smaller palettes. And I'm looking forward to trying more of their products in 2020 because I've been really impressed. I got my very first Melt Cosmetics palette in December. This one is the Muerte palette, and it is so pretty. I can't wait to film a video using it because I've had so much fun just playing with it, wearing it on the eyes. The shadows are perfect. They're so easy to work with. They're really vibrant and intense, but again, they're also really blendable. So I will film a video using it very soon. I did get this Charlotte Tilbury quad in the mail as PR as well. I've been testing it out because I've never tried a Charlotte Tilbury eyeshadow. Her eyeshadows are so expensive, and I have to say, even though I enjoy a couple of these shadows, I just feel like they're so overpriced for what you get. So I'm sure I'll talk about it more in an upcoming video, but I do currently own that one. And then I have these Too Faced palettes that were part of their Tutti Frutti collection. This one is the Razzle Dazzle Berry palette. I really like these. I know again that they got mixed reviews, but there are a couple of different formulas within this smaller palette, and I think they work really well. I also have the Pineapple palette, which is more of like a typical neutral palette. But some of the shadows in here are a little bit more creamy. Some are like true metallic, some are matte, and I don't know, I just like them. They go on sale fairly often, so if they appeal to you, I do recommend picking them up. I have two different Flower Beauty palettes. The Golden Naturals palette is one of my favorites, and then I also have a smokier version, which kind of reminds me of the Urban Decay Naked Smoky palette, but a more affordable alternative. Speaking of Urban Decay, I do have the Born to Run palette. I really enjoy this palette. I don't reach for it as much as I did when I first got it, to be honest with you guys, but it is a palette that I do like to bring with me when I travel during the summer, just because I think that I can get so many different eye looks using just this one palette. It's very sleek and compact, and I do enjoy using it. I also have the Dominique Cosmetics Berries and Cream palette. This was my first palette purchase of 2019, and I love it. I think Dominique Cosmetics formula is really great and a little bit underrated. Recently, we got this palette in a BoxyCharm. This one is the Celestial Thunder palette, which is like a mini version of her Celestial Storm palette, and I think it's so pretty, so much fun to use. So again, I'm looking forward to seeing what this brand releases in 2020. This one is the Pretty Vulgar Nightingale palette, which again, I think I got in a BoxyCharm. It is definitely more of a cooler toned palette. It has some gorgeous, more subtle, smoky shades in it. And then again, I got the Alamar Cosmetics palette in a BoxyCharm. We do get quite a few palettes in BoxyCharm. Some I love, some I don't, but I do really enjoy this one. I think the quality is really beautiful, especially the metallic shadows in here. The Natasha Denona Sunrise palette was like my first larger Natasha Denona palette, my only palette of this size from them, and I really loved it. I hope they release more palettes of this size in 2020 at this price point. It's still a pricier palette, but it's like half the price of their regular full-size palette. So I did love that one. I do love that one. I have a couple of e.l.f. palettes. This one is the New Classics palette, which comes with just some pretty neutrals. And then I also have Opposites Attract, which has a couple of neutrals, a couple of colorful shades. But As far as e.l.f. shadows go, these are some of my favorites. This one is a Tarte palette. It's a little bit older, but they released this and then they released like an updated version of it, which comes with different colors. I really like the original. It doesn't necessarily look like anything special, but it's just a good staple neutral palette. You get matte shadows and then you also get some contour shades. So if you wear a lot of neutrals, this is a good option. But again, like I said, they have an updated version, which I think has maybe like some blushes and some shimmer shadows in it. Here are my Juvia's Place palettes. So I have the Masquerade Mini, which is one of my favorites. I love the colors in here. They're so intense and vibrant, and I love wearing their metallic shadows all over the lid. I also have the Magic Mini palette, which has some interesting colors. Like this is a little bit of a unique palette to me because the colors are all over the place. Like you get pastels, but you also get some really intense, vibrant shades. But again, I think it's a lot of fun to use. I do have the Warrior palette, which is a good like 9-pan neutral palette. I think the colors are so intense and rich and vibrant, so I do enjoy using that one. I purchased the Warrior 2, I think because I kind of associated it with Warrior 1, but I don't reach for this one as much. I think that the shadows perform well, but when it comes to Juvia's Place, I definitely prefer their metallic shadows over their matte shadows. The Tribe palette is one of my favorites because you do get some really pretty greens. You get a couple of duochromes, but overall it's just a really interesting, unique palette, and I don't have anything like it. The Nubian was one of my very first Juvia's Place palettes. It comes with a lot of neutral colors, so this one did get used quite a bit in my collection. And then I also have the Saharan, which comes with a couple of neutrals, but also some colorful shades as well. I think I have a video on my channel, again, breaking down all of the Juvia's Place palettes, so if you want to check it out, I'll link it in the description box below. But the last one that I have is the Afrique palette, and it comes with some colorful tones and a couple of neutrals as well. And then I guess just a couple of random palettes. I totally forgot about this ColourPop one. This comes with a couple of single shadows, a lot of pressed glitters, which I don't really wear, so I actually haven't even used any of the shadows in here. I just kind of have it sitting in my collection. I also have this Tarte palette. This one was part of their Love, Trust, and Fairy Dust collection. It's a little bit older, but I really enjoyed using it. It comes with some pretty subtle colors, and I don't know, when it comes to Tarte, I don't have a lot of their palettes because their formula doesn't typically work out for me, but I did love this one, and I also loved this one. This one is like their unicorn palette. I thought I actually decluttered it because when I was talking about it in a recent video, I couldn't find it. And then again, I found it in like the back of my drawer. So that is a sign I need to go through and declutter my palettes, but I've always loved this one. Again, it's pretty old, but it is a pretty palette. I recently got 2 Storybook Cosmetics palettes in my BoxyCharm boxes. So this is the first one. I haven't actually used it. I only swatched it, but I thought the formula felt promising. The colors are pretty, so I am looking forward to trying it out. The only thing is that they're a little bit bulky, so they're not going to be easy to store, but they are really beautiful palettes. They're kind of designed to look like books, so they're shaped like a true book. They're pretty large. This one is the Briar Rose palette, which has some like pretty pinks, some blues. So I will test out the formula and let you guys know what I think. And then I have 2 large round palettes, which don't really fit in my drawer. Honestly, my drawer is kind of overflowing at this point, which is weird because I didn't purchase that many palettes in 2019, but some of them are a little bit bulky, and I did get some in subscription boxes. But this one is the Urban Decay Elements, which was their holiday palette for 2018, and then I also have this Essence palette from 2018 as well. This one is the Counting Hearts palette. So those are all of the palettes that I currently have in my collection. I do have quite a few. And I do like having a variety of palettes because I love eyeshadow palettes. I don't buy them to use them once and then get rid of them. So like you guys saw, I do have some that are years old at this point, but I do need to go through and declutter and just kind of cut it down a little bit. So that video will be up at some point. I need to sit down and film it. So you'll see it on my channel within the next few weeks, maybe like the next month or 2. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching my eyeshadow palette collection for 2020. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Let me know in the comment section below which palettes are your favorite. I would love to know, and I'll see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye.